Good evening, dear friends. Wishing you all a good week.
Greetings, everyone.
Dear Ümit, you have been accompanying me in this series just a little bit longer than 2 months. Time really flies.
Just like a lifetime passes. We don't even notice how years pass by. But when I compare the photos of my children from a few months ago, wow, such a big difference I see.
Well, last week I really felt how time passed so quickly. It is only 8 years ago, in April 2013. This book, The Divine Order and the Universe, after being kept in the notary safes for 54 years, is disclosed and published. And last week, the medium of these spiritual communiques we read and comment on in this series, passed away. Let me say a few words to honor his life and his memory. 3 or 4 months before the disclosure of this book, Mr. Attila Goyer intuited that the time for this book to be made public, and with his lifelong friend Mr. Harass, Mr. Attila brought the copy he was entrusted with, to our society. And he frequently said to us, "The Voyagers of Destiny brought the content of this book down to earth through me, but they never stopped guarding me. I'd like to express my gratitude, on behalf of all members of our society and our foundation, for Mr. Attila's existence and his sense of responsibility. Considering the 54 years of reticence on the shoulders of the guardians of this book. They completed their lifetimes and now, it is our responsibility to carry on. He was such a jolly man, full of life, he gave the life's due, and he set such a balanced example for all of us, living his life to the fullest and at the same time, guarding such a divine gift. We witnessed that 2 of the 3 guardians of this book achieved this almost perfect balance between preserving their questioning and living within a state of immense surrender. And I think this is the most precious heritage they left to us." Yes, would you like to add something, dear Ümit?
We all feel peace in our hearts. I mean, I am sure some of us feel sad, but when we see such people that properly completed their duty outlined in their life plan and then passed away to hereafter, the only thing we can say or wish that, may all of us have such deaths. Considering the quality and greatness of the deeds he had done, and his faithful reticence related to his duty, if we say that wish he were here for longer, it may be that our earthly craving side is talking. I am convinced that he and all guardians of this book and of course, Mr. Ruhselman are now in much better realms. May their journey without obstacles. I am grateful for all deeds they have done.
Let's start replying one of the most frequently asked questions to us. Why this need of waiting 54 years before the disclosure of this book?
The steps taken on the evolution of humankind are rather related to the general level of humankind's comprehension than the individuals with such duties. I think, it took a long time until the realities of humankind reached a state to be concerned with such knowledge, to understand the causality connection between their reality and the knowledge given by this book. When we look at the life story of Mr. Ruhselman, we see that, after reading the whole literature on spiritism and spiritualism and also the research on parapsychology, there is still 10 years between the first communiqué he received from the plan called Master and the second communiqué. There have been certain time periods between such communiques. Most probably, the plan conveying this knowledge had to take into account the worldly possibilities and imagery of Mr. Ruhselman. He was a human being, after all, even though he has incarnated with this responsibility, with this duty. And also, there must have been an application or testing of this knowledge upon the brain of a human, that is, of Mr. Ruhselman, that acquired a certain level of substructure through worldly imagery, in order to check how and in which manner this knowledge taken in and understood. And the timing of the disclosure must have taken into consideration the possibilities of the time period we now live in, with all those fast advances in the mass communication technologies and also the current level of human comprehensions. I think, these are the possible explanations of the need for waiting 54 years.
And also, there are some prophecies at the last part of this book. For example, the increasing effects of global warming in various countries are listed, how the polar caps, and of course, the whole solar system will be affected by the influences coming from the sojourner planet's magnetic field, the increase in the frequency of natural disasters, etc. And today, we humans are in such a period of time that we can detect and measure such changes, and also, we can easily access this information up to the degree that it even becomes a part of our small talk. Moreover, the development of quantum physics and a whole new philosophy built on this field of research, with books, videos, animations published so far made these complex topics easy to understand for the layman. And of course, these also advanced our knowledge and comprehension. Therefore, in that sense, I think the times we live in most suitable for verifying the knowledge we read in this book. Now we have enough indications and measurements in our hands to make those prophecies about natural disasters or influences on the solar system meaningful. Had it been read in the 1960s, such prophecies could not be felt that close. Now, it is easier to collaborate these prophecies with the current measurements and detections in our hands.
One of the confusing factors for many readers is how to determine when these prophecies about natural disasters mentioned in the book will manifest. 100 years after the compilation of the book, or 100 years after the publication of the book? From the clues we read in the book, this must be 100 years after the compilation of the book.
50 years before or 50 years later, what does it mean in the timeline of the whole universe? However, because we are humans with an average life expectancy of 75 years, it is understandable that 50 years become important for us. Still, we must remember that our lifetimes are not even a moment within the lifetime of our universe. Alright, another question, more correctly, a wish. I want to know about the first reason of all existence, the root cause of our evolutionary journey.
This is a rather philosophical question. I'd like to remind our friends that among the principles of neo-spiritualism, there is one related to this question. In short, we must understand before everything else, all the states about the creation of all existence is out of the boundaries of our comprehension. And we read in this book, God is described as the unattainability of unattainability. We read in this book that there is no limit or a final destination of evolution of spirits, that all thinking and questioning about the superuniverse truths will be beyond our comprehension. We can only know about these, intuit these, or become convinced of these. For example, we are convinced of infinity but we cannot comprehend infinity. Just like nothingness, our comprehension cannot conceive this concept, consequently, we cannot comprehend the creation out of nothingness. Even when our beings eventually become included in the plan of duty, we will still not have answers to such philosophical questions. All we can observe and conclude on is that, the direction of the development and evolution of beings is always towards the increased complexity, goodness, and maturity. As the beings' experiences increase and comprehensions widen, they have more freedom and more possibilities to utilize their free will in accordance with the possibilities of the stage or level they are in.
Why? How? Such questions belong to our minds, to our mental processing, and when our minds can label things and put things in an order like, this is before and this is after, we feel at ease. Yes, our minds are preoccupied with such questions, because a part of our consciousness is searching for the causality connections. However, causality is a principle valid for our universe, not a superuniverse principle, just like the duality principle. This book explains the beginning of the manifest realm, starting from how the initial motion begins in the already existing amorphous matter in our universe. And because the substances of spirits as the superuniverse truths and of matter of our universe cannot be in direct relation, how spirits build bodies which are beings, and how those beings build bodies which are plants, animals, and humans. For the newcomers, we kindly remind you to watch our previous videos in this reading and commentary series. Of course, if you read the whole book and also watch the videos, better. Yes, another question. Did this mediumistic connection continue with the Voyagers of Destiny, after this book is compiled? I already mentioned that Mr. Attila had told us many times that the Voyagers of Destiny brought the content of this book down to earth through me, but they never stopped guarding me. Therefore, we can say that the influential connection continued, but there was no more conveying knowledge through the medium. So, this book is completed, not remained uncompleted. I guess this friend heard the rumors on the grapevine. Yes, since the publication of this book we heard these, as well. For example, this book is only an introduction, not the real manuscript. The real one is buried under Mr. Ruhselman's house. And such rumors got me thinking, why are people in such a search? Obviously, they were not satisfied with this book. I am sure, in the previous videos, I already mentioned my surprise to the initial reactions of the regular visitors and some ex-members of our society about this book's disclosure. The ones who have always been asking about the book were the ones who felt the biggest disappointment. Perhaps they expected to be enlightened at once, or they expected a completely new age would start right away, or their frequency elevated so high at once, etc. Probably, greater their expectations, the bigger their disappointment was.
It is understandable because this book requires us to change our habitual thinking, habitual assuming and habitual living. And the knowledge in this book is for whole mankind, the knowledge pertaining to their final reality. Still, I think that, when it is necessary, in near or far future, there may be more knowledge given to humankind. You mentioned people's expectations about this book's disclosure. What about what is expected from us humans? I think, at this point of our development, just as we are expected to have conscience developed enough to discern what is good and what is not, we are also expected to have comprehensions wide enough to discern the beneficial and developmentary knowledge among the thousands of different channelings, teachings, etc., because there will be more of these, and this is normal. The important thing is the needs of our spirits, hence, the needs of our beings.
Yes, another question. Who am I?
If you remember, last week I had mentioned the first contact of Mr. Ruhselman with the plan, and his first question to the plan was, what is reality? This friend of ours had sent this question last week, saying that I would ask this question. And if not in that first session but at the following sessions Mr. Ruhselman conducted, ample answers were given to this question, and now we read these in this book.
Now, we can reply this question in this way. I am the appearance of an essence being in the hydrogen realm due to the imperative of incarnation, which is connected and in service to a spirit from the moment the first atom's emergence and until the end of the universe. Alright, another question. Can we consider Mr. Ruhselman's earlier books as the old reality and the divine order and the universe as the new reality?
This question from last week, when we had discussed the concept of reality. When we compare the knowledge in earlier books of Mr. Ruhselman with this book we read together in this series, we see that certain concepts have become wider, more encompassing. And certain concepts have not changed but explained in a deeper way.
We already read in the divine order and the universe that, as realities ascend, they also contain the simpler realities of the lower levels. Therefore, as the realities join to each other and widen, it is necessary not to be stuck with the old realities. This means that when we go to a higher or new reality, we don't erase the lower or old reality, we just include it, encompass it. In that sense, regardless of the difference in terms or naming of the concepts in earlier the books of Mr. Ruhselman, this book explains the concepts and answers many questions our minds have been preoccupied with for ages, in a much wider and deeper and clearer manner. For example, the concept of incarnation. Or, the relation between spirit and matter. Or the new model of consciousness it introduces. Or dreams, sleep, consciousness. Or time. Or death and processes after death. The difference is, in the earlier books of Mr. Ruhselman, concepts addressed are explained in the context of sessions conducted, the discarnate beings that were contacted during those sessions. However, in the divine order and the universe, we read the mechanisms behind all those concepts. Because, when we completely understand the mechanism, we can detect the appearances of these mechanisms in many levels, starting from our personal life. Another friend asked, I understand that we cannot move to a higher level of reality within a single lifetime. Am I correct? Last week, we had discussed this as a reply to a similar question.
I'd like to suggest our friends studying the parts of the book related to the essence knowledge. Because the essence of whatever we can glean from realities we live in is always to be transferred to our being. In that sense, they are very valuable. Actually, when we look at our own lifetime, we can easily see the realities changed for us, all the time, and they must change, otherwise, it becomes a problem.
Last week, as we discussed the realities, we both gave our personal examples. So, please, watch our previous video. Still, let me say it again. A single lifetime is not limited with only one reality. However, unless we complete a reality, we cannot truly pass to a higher one. We must live it thoroughly. Yet, the higher reality always sends pre-influences to the lower reality, so, in time, a gradual passing to the higher one from the lower one occurs. We don't pass from one reality to another like distinct jumps from a lower step to higher step. A gradual attraction or orientations towards the higher one gradually occurs. Yes, our minds like to understand these as distinct jumps from lower to higher, or this one is completed and the next one is started. It is much better to consider this passing from reality to reality as a gradual process. Another friend asks, what does the unitary mean?
The uppermost boundary point of the universe. A spirit, as a super-universe truth, or more correctly, the being it built, arrives at this last point of the universe when it acquires all knowledge it has to gain in order to complete the matter universe. And, because that spirit finished this leg of its evolutionary journey in the matter universe, it continues towards to other universes that has different substance, of course, in order to become involved with those, again, indirectly. Also, there is this metaphor of the light cone of the force. The tip of this cone is the unitary, and its magnetic field is singular. In other words, the unitary is the seat from where the whole universe is governed or managed. Similar to the beings that reach the initial levels of the plan of duty to become a part of truths as they comprehend the necessities. The beings that are merited to reach the unitary are in a state of becoming harmonized and united with the necessities of the influences ascending to entire universe. And also, the unitary is the first point where the needs of any spirit that is in its evolutionary journey within a given universe, and the necessities particular to that universe that are determined by the force of the original principle appear as influences. The entire universe is governed from the unitary, all of the directives, all those branching out of the influences belonging to the plans of duty, all of the magnetic communications that are happening right now down to our particles. In short, all things we can and cannot imagine are under the control and governance of the unitary.
I'd like to add an explanation from the divine order and the universe. Necessities coming from the original principle are distributed across the unitary which occupies the uppermost level of the universe. And there, these influences constitute a unity. So, these necessities which are unified with the unitary, filtrate through the unitary as influences and are scattered to the communities, individuals, matter and beings, to all parts of matter down to the smallest particles as in accordance with the needs of each being and generate myriad transformations, deformations, and formations. And through this mechanism of influences, the progress and flow of the universe is achieved. The next question is, does the comprehension mean knowing that we cannot comprehend?
Our friend had made a personal description. There are many descriptions of comprehension in this book, and its meaning or working is explained at many levels, such as our worldly comprehension, the comprehension of our essence being, and even before that, the comprehension at its most fundamental sense, that caused the emergence of the being. And the comprehension of spirit. Well, I'd better stop at this point because in the further pages of the book we will read more descriptions. I don't want to give spoilers.
Of course, we talk about such a pervasive concept that this book describes comprehension as the ferment of being. And, as you read all those multi-level descriptions in the book, please try to understand which belongs to matter and which belongs to spirit. Then, these descriptions of comprehension may give you more intuitions, dear friends.
Yes, when I read the book first time, I had said to myself that whoever understands necessity and comprehension understands the book. And in our internal study groups, we were saying, if we can understand this concept of comprehension, the rest is easier.
Another question. Do the beings in the spatium visit their loved ones in the world? Or can they communicate with them via dreams?
First, let me remind what we read about spatium period. When a human dies, it means his or her being withdraws its influences from that human body. Then being enters in an isolated state because it needs to make an accounting of the lifetime just ended. First by becoming totally immersed in the emotional and mental imagery of that lifetime's all experiences and knowledge. And then, by comparing the experiences of that lifetime to the knowledge of previous lifetimes that is stored in the subconscious field. This is such an isolated state that, there is no secondary and external influences coming, the being is in a closed state, and it is preoccupied with only the impressions in the magnetic field synthesis of the brain cell beings. In general, there is no more communication between this being and his or her loved ones. However, if there are certain necessities in accordance with the certain needs of that being and the beings related to that being in his or her last lifetime, some communication occurs between a deceased being in the spatium period and their living loved ones, or between all beings in the spatium and the people that are conducting spiritism sessions. But this does not mean that it happens to everybody after a loved one dies, or to every being in the spatium. It is understandable that when our loved ones die, we may wish to continue our connection to them, but after reading this book, we understand that this can only happen if there is a need for this on the part of the deceased being and on the part of us. And this happens rarely.
I'd like to add a few things about the dreams part of this question. Let's say, our mother or father or a loved one dies, and we begin to see them in our dreams. This does not mean we are in direct contact with them. Sometimes, especially when we cannot accept the death of a parent and cannot deal with this loss, our guarding beings or spiritual guides send influences to our organism by using the images of that parent in a dream, mostly as messages to our center of consciousness. Why? Because, if our system is overly searching and craving for such a connection, it may mean that we couldn't properly say goodbye. There may be many unfinished businesses with that parent, mostly emotional and mental issues we couldn't resolve while that parent was alive. If you remember, during sleep we make accounting of the day, and dream mechanism works in different ways for different purposes, and also, we don't see dreams, we imagine during dreams. So, we must also consider the dreams as an activity of imagination. Also, we must remember that the spherical time comprehension is valid for the spatium, not the superficial time, the linear time comprehension we have in this world. So, for a being in the spatium, the passing of time is felt completely different than for us in the world. And, to connect this reply to another frequently asked question, which is the spatium or hereafter a place we go when we die? No, this is not a separate place or environ we go after we die. When our body dies, as our being withdraws its influences and concentration from the body, our being enters into an isolated state. So, the spatium or hereafter is a state our being has after the death of the body. Another question. Does spiritual evolution progress upwards, or as the swinging of a pendulum you mentioned? We had mentioned this example of pendulum when we discussed the realities, saying that realities don't follow each other in a linear line, but we move up and down between realities. I guess, our friend applies this example to the concept of evolution of spirits. Would you like to reply this?
First, let me remind our friends that evolution is for spirits and development is for beings. Yes, beings achieve this ever-increasing development by synthesizing their conclusions from their past lifetimes with whatever they learn and experience in their individual lifetimes, which allow the beings to take another step forward in their development. Because of this, we cannot say this or that human being is not advanced in development by just looking at the way she or he lived their lifetime or the manner of their death. After all, no matter how appearances are, a being acquires various impressions and always increases its knowledge and comprehension in this or that degree and way. Consequently, going backward or devolution or involution is not possible. Evolution or development continues forward. Yes, there are appearances of beings that are stuck in certain realities, in the spatium as well as in the world. When we are stuck in a certain reality and cannot move up, then by the various interventions of the beings in duty, we experience suffering and hardships, and finally learn some lessons to make us move up. We already discussed how the knowledge of a lifetime is assessed by the being in the spatium, and after compared with the previous knowledge in the subconscious, how the essence of this knowledge becomes the essence knowledge of the being to be reflected to its spirit. In short, the evolution and development is always towards the more complex and subtler, not at all like that old concept of transmigration.
This concept of transmigration is rooted in Hinduism. In short, after you reach the human stage, if you do bad and evil things in a lifetime, when you die, you incarnate as an animal. This is called transmigration. However, one of the principles of the neo-spiritualism established by Mr. Ruhselman is that there is no going back in development. When a being reaches the human stage, it does not fall back to the animal or plant stage. And again, there is a related question from a friend, which is, how and what are the plant and animal states in reincarnation? So we can also reply in the same vein. From we read in the divine order and the universe about these previous stages, we can say that within each stage there is a hierarchical progress, and also, sudden jumps from plant stage to animal stage is not possible, because before passing to a higher stage, the beings have to spend a preparatory and maybe an acclimating period in a semi-subtle realm, in an interval milieu. Again, I refer all friends to our earlier videos in this series. And to the reincarnation part of this question. This book does not mention reincarnation. We only read various explanations of incarnation that are correcting our previous understanding this concept, that nothing enters or exists into the flesh and bone bodies, and that we can use this concept only at the very primitive levels of the plant stage. Alright, another question. Are the brain cell beings what we perceive as I, name as ego? Try to silence in our meditations, and here is inner talk which directing us to the earthly cravings?
First, let's make a brief summary of what we read about the brain cells beings in this book. Our body is under governance of a being that our spirit built as an ensemble of energies and influences. Our being projects a major part of its influences to our center of consciousness, more correctly, to our brain and nervous system. Each cell of our brain and nervous system, as well as other cells in our bodies, has a being. And those beings of the brain cells, together, make up the magnetic field synthesis of the center of consciousness. This is such a complex system that there are secondary centers connected to the brain and substations connected to these, and again, there is a hierarchical order among these. Our being's influences and all communication and interaction between brain cells beings occur vibrationally. We receive or perceive all impressions pertaining to our vicinity through our nervous system. And imagine the amount of information our brain and nervous system process at each moment. Now, if we will talk about earthly cravings, then we need to remember or study the topic of conscience. We had mentioned that the conscience, as a developmental mechanism, has two components. Lower component is earthly cravings, and higher component is duty. Of course, these two components are not made up of fixed, constant, unchanging values. On the contrary, for each human being, the values in either component are in a flux all the time. And, no, our inner talk is not the voice of the brain cells beings. However, all of us must study the content and quality of our inner talk, because what we repeat, what we avoid and what we favor during our inner talk actually tell us so much about ourselves.
Actually, this is related to the personality of a person. We may describe ego as a territory of our personality with more or less definite boundaries. And our personality is influences by so many factors: genetic material from our parents, emotions and feelings of our mother we absorb like a sponge while we are in her womb and assume as ours, all ancestral dynamics that may affect our current lifetime, our education and nurturing, our culture, etc. In short, ego is related to our personality in our current lifetime. Another point we must be careful about. Ego is not the same with egoistic. Ego, as the boundaries of our personality is needed, it's supposed to grow and widen gradually as we grow up. However, our ego may become inflated, instead of growing. For example, you apply for a job and are hired, and you start from the lowest position, let's say, at a factory. There is a general manager of the factory at the top position, and a doorman, a guard, a receptionist at the low position. And of course, there are many other positions at different departments of this factory. This bottom-to-top sequence is not about which position is better than another, because all of these are needed for the function of this factory. Still, from the perspective of the healthy growth of ego, the position of the general manager is wider than the doorman's position due to the scope of the responsibilities their positions entail. But if someone who started as a doorman suddenly promoted to position of general manager, without going through all positions, from bottom to top, without learning and experiencing the necessary knowledge of the positions in between, then his ego inflates. And if the ego growth is not healthy, then a person's orienting towards the earthly cravings becomes easier, or, as expressed in our friend's question, the voice of earthly cravings becomes louder than the voice of duty. Why? Because, then, self-interest is stronger and ego becomes egoistical, all focus and concentration of the person becomes directed to keep things as they are, or to acquire more of the things, on expense of others or of higher, sublimating values. As to the brain cells beings, the main role they play is forming the development of the emerging brain of the fetus in the womb, because they carry the stored knowledge in the subconscious of the being to the new body it builds, and they influence the magnetic fields of the new brain cells beings. And all of these processes are under the governance of our being. Yes, to properly discern these is very important. Alright, next question is it possible that the beings in duty that are at the initial steps of the plan of duty, and that become guardian beings of us humans cannot properly do their duty because their merit is limited? Is there earthly cravings or egoism at those bottom steps, even if in small degrees?
Let me say first that, what we call earthly cravings versus conscience or duty is a developmental mechanism particular to our hydrogen cosmos, particular to our world. Starting from the initial stages of the plan of duty, instead of conscience duality, duty duality prevails, because for the being to be able to reach these initial stages of the plan of duty, first they need to go through the plan of love to have applications in order to deal with the last vestiges of earthly cravings. Therefore, beings that become guardian beings for human beings don't have earthly cravings anymore. But of course, their experience and comprehension are limited compared to the higher organizers and organizations in the plan of duty, but always under the governance of these higher levels, so we can say that there is not much chance of making mistakes.
Because this is our last video with dear Ümit, and next week, a new commentator will join me in this series, we'd like to reply as many questions as possible this evening. Let me read the next one. If the spirit is superuniverse and has no direct contact with matter, and because matter cannot move by itself, then who or what makes choices or decisions in the face of events?
If we study the mirror symbol and the indirect contact between spirit and matter, this question of our friend will be easily answered. Whichever example we may think of to explain this indirect contact will be still of matter, material. And because the spirit is superuniverse and has no direct contact with matter, after a very long and passive adaptation stage, spirits build bodies for themselves that will be in service to them until the end of the universe. Then, the journey of these beings, as vehicles of spirit in the universe, begin, and again, these beings build bodies for themselves, starting from the most primitive plant cells. And if we talk about conscious choices and decisions, this phase starts only after those bodies pass through plant and animal stages to reach the human stage. And at the human stage, human body is named as conscious matter in this book. Our reality changed with the divine order and the universe. I mean, we reframed our previous knowledge in accordance with this new knowledge about spirits given in this book.
And we must underline that, yes, spirits are superuniverse truths. But we read in this book about novice spirits. How come? Because spirits are novice of the matter universe, our universe. We don't know anything about the relations of spirits with other universes. And again, in the divine order in the universe, we read that mankind cannot know or understand the evolutionary needs of the spirits. And moreover, this universe, the matter universe, our material world, all of these are because of the evolutionary needs of spirits. And also, this book makes a distinction between the evolution of spirits and the development of matter, and these two advance in tandem. All right, the last question for this evening. Will you conduct spiritual sessions to contact the deceased medium of this book? No, we will not. Let me remind our dear friends, conducting a session, a spiritism session or to channel disembodied entities etc., cannot be done just because you can or just because you are curious about such things. To receive some knowledge, you need to have questions with a proper intention, with a proper purpose. Otherwise, poking spiritual realms just out of curiosity, without having a higher purpose, bring different tests and trials to your life. None of the sessions Mr. Ruhselman conducted was to get messages from deceased relatives, to have information from future etc. His aim and purpose have always been to acquire and convey ever higher levels of spiritual knowledge. And I can certainly say this for myself that we have not yet understood, digested and applied the knowledge in the divine order and the universe. Not yet. And, we are not Mr. Ruhselman. I think all of us need to know our place. Because there were, and are, and will be myriad groups and mediums, psychics poking around the higher realms and claiming they receive knowledge. Again, I'd like to remind the words of our dear teacher Mr. Erikdal, as you go higher, the ground gets more slippery. And the fall from the heights would be more painful. Yes, dear Ümit, this is our last video with you. I'd like to thank you so much for your comments, your hard work and efforts.
Let me thank you, everyone following our videos, spending effort, together with us to understand more and more each week. Hoping to see and meet you all in our lectures and events.
Hoping to see you all next week. Good evening.
Good evening.